Welcome to Unlock English, your go-to channel for mastering the English language. Whether you're just starting out or looking to refine your skills, we're here to guide you every step of the way. Through engaging lessons, practical tips, and real-life examples, you'll unlock your potential and gain the confidence to communicate fluently. Join us on this exciting journey to unlock the door to better English, one lesson at a time. Now today, we are going to talk about the value of mistakes and how it play a best role in your language learning journey. The fear of making mistakes is a common challenge for many language learners, including the student who hesitates to practice speaking English. This fear often stems from a worry about looking incompetent or sounding stupid in front of others. For learners, especially adults, the prospect of being judged can be intimidating. They may feel pressure to perform perfectly, which leads them to avoid speaking altogether, missing valuable practice opportunities. This fear is not unique to this student, but is shared by many people learning a second language. When learning a new language, fear of mistakes can be a significant obstacle to progress. It's natural to feel self-conscious when speaking in a language you're not fluent in, as you're stepping outside of your comfort zone. However, mistakes are an inevitable part of the process. Overcoming this fear often requires a shift in mindset. Instead of viewing mistakes as failures, they should be seen as learning opportunities that guide you toward improvement. In fact, language acquisition is one area where mistakes play a critical role in the learning process. In my own language learning journey, I've found that embracing mistakes is key to improving. The more I speak and make errors, the better I become at identifying and correcting them. While it can be uncomfortable at first, each mistake provides immediate feedback on what I need to work on. For example, if I misuse a word or phrase in a conversation, I learn the correct usage by context or from corrections by others. Over time, these small adjustments add up, gradually improving my fluency. One strategy that helps me deal with the fear of making mistakes is to focus on communication rather than perfection. The primary goal of language is to convey ideas, not to be flawless. By prioritizing the message over the mechanics of grammar or vocabulary, I find it easier to speak with confidence. When I remind myself that it's okay if my sentence isn't perfect, I can relax and focus on participating in the conversation, which ultimately enhances my learning experience. Another helpful approach is to practice speaking in low-pressure environments. Talking with friends or language partners who are supportive and patient makes it easier to experiment with the language without the fear of judgment. These safe spaces allow me to make mistakes without embarrassment, which boosts my confidence and encourages me to take more risks in other settings, such as formal conversations or public speaking. Learning to laugh at my own mistakes has also been incredibly liberating. Humor can transform a potentially embarrassing moment into a lighthearted one, making it easier to move forward. Rather than feeling ashamed when I mispronounce a word or mix up grammar, I treat it as part of the journey and something that will eventually be corrected with practice. This relaxed attitude helps reduce the anxiety that comes with making errors. Another key to overcoming the fear of mistakes is to remember that native speakers, too, often make errors in their own language. No one speaks perfectly all the time, even in their first language. Realizing this helps put things in perspective. If native speakers can fumble words or make grammatical mistakes without being overly concerned, there's no reason for language learners to hold themselves to an impossible standard of perfection. Focusing on small victories rather than dwelling on mistakes is another way I handle fear. Every time I successfully communicate an idea or hold a conversation in the new language, I celebrate that progress. These positive experiences gradually outweigh the negative feelings associated with errors. Over time, the fear diminishes as I accumulate more successful interactions. It's also important to practice self-compassion during the language learning process. Language acquisition is a long journey, and it's okay to stumble along the way. By treating myself with kindness and patience, I'm able to maintain motivation even when I make repeated mistakes. This mindset helps me keep pushing forward instead of giving up due to frustration or fear of failure. Shadowing or imitating native speakers is another tool that helps reduce mistakes over time. By repeating phrases and sentences after native speakers, I internalize correct pronunciation, rhythm, and sentence structure. This builds muscle memory and confidence, making it easier to speak more fluently in real conversations. The more I practice this technique, the fewer mistakes I make in spontaneous speech. Reading aloud is another practice that helps overcome the fear of making mistakes. It allows me to become more comfortable with the sounds and rhythm of the language, which reduces hesitation when speaking. Additionally, it's a great way to reinforce vocabulary and grammar rules without the pressure of interacting with another person. Over time, this builds a stronger foundation for speaking. Lastly, keeping in mind that language learning is a process, not a race, helps to manage expectations. Mistakes are part of the journey to fluency, and it's important to acknowledge that improvement takes time. By setting realistic goals and measuring progress in terms of communication rather than perfection, I'm able to stay focused on what matters most: expressing myself and connecting with others through language. Learning a language and learning to play a musical instrument are often compared because both involve acquiring complex skills over time, and the process of mastering either requires dedication, practice, and patience. Just as a musician practices scales or specific pieces of music to improve, language learners must engage in repeated practice, such as vocabulary drills, speaking, and listening exercises. In both cases, regular, focused practice leads to gradual improvement, even though progress might seem slow at first. Consistency is key, and both endeavors require time to build fluency, whether it's with words or notes. Both language learning and playing an instrument are multi-sensory experiences. When learning a language, we use our eyes to read, our ears to listen, and our mouths to speak. Similarly, when learning to play an instrument, we rely on sight to read music, hearing to gauge the quality of our playing, and touch to manipulate the instrument. This engagement of multiple senses in both cases makes the learning process richer and more immersive, allowing us to internalize complex patterns of sound, whether in speech or music. Another similarity lies in the fact that both language and music have rules and structures, but they also allow room for creativity. In language, grammar and syntax dictate how sentences are formed, just as musical theory guides how notes come together to create harmony and melody. However, within these rules, there is room to express individuality. A language learner can express their thoughts and emotions uniquely, just as a musician can interpret a piece of music in their own way, showing that mastering the basics opens the door to creativity and self-expression. One of the key aspects of both learning a language and playing an instrument is muscle memory. Just as a pianist develops muscle memory for finger movements on the keys, a language learner builds muscle memory for the movements of the mouth and tongue when producing certain sounds. Over time, these actions become automatic, allowing both the musician and the language learner to focus on higher-level aspects, such as expression or communication, rather than on the mechanics of each movement. Repetition is crucial in both fields. Just as musicians practice scales or chord progressions repeatedly to gain fluency, language learners need to repeat vocabulary, phrases, and sentence structures until they become second nature. This repetition helps embed knowledge in long-term memory. Whether it's playing a difficult passage in a song or learning how to properly conjugate verbs in a new language, consistent repetition is the foundation for improvement and eventual mastery. Mistakes play an important role in both learning to play an instrument and learning a language. No one plays a piece of music perfectly on their first attempt, just as no one speaks a new language flawlessly from the beginning. Mistakes are part of the learning process, teaching us what we need to improve. A musician might hit the wrong note or miss a beat, just as a language learner might mispronounce a word or use incorrect grammar. In both cases, these errors offer valuable lessons, showing us where we need more practice and how to refine our skills. The progression from beginner to advanced in both language learning and playing an instrument follows a similar path. At the start, everything feels difficult, and even basic tasks require immense focus. Over time, as skills develop, learners begin to tackle more complex challenges. For instance, a beginner musician might start with simple scales, while an advanced player performs full symphonies. Similarly, a beginner language learner starts with basic phrases, while an advanced speaker can hold intricate conversations. The journey in both disciplines is one of continual growth and refinement. Listening plays a central role in both language learning and music. Just as musicians improve by listening to how professionals perform a piece, language learners enhance their skills by listening to native speakers. In both cases, listening helps learners internalize patterns, rhythms, and nuances. A musician might learn about dynamics, phrasing, or tone, while a language learner picks up on pronunciation, intonation, and the flow of conversation. Active listening is crucial for both fields, as it helps build a deeper understanding of the subject. The emotional aspect of both learning a language and playing an instrument is another key similarity. Both activities involve a strong connection to emotions. Music has the power to move people, and playing a piece beautifully can evoke deep feelings in both the performer and the listener. Similarly, language allows people to express their emotions, share their stories, and connect with others on a personal level. Mastering either skill provides the learner with the ability to communicate on a more profound, emotional level. Perseverance is a crucial trait for both language learners and musicians. Learning an instrument or a language is not something that can be achieved quickly. There will be frustrating moments where progress feels slow and the learner may be tempted to give up. However, both pursuits require a long-term commitment. The rewards, though gradual, are significant. The sense of accomplishment after being able to perform a piece of music or hold a conversation in a new language is immense and worth the effort put in. Feedback is essential in both fields. Just as a music teacher provides constructive criticism to help a student improve their playing, a language teacher gives feedback on pronunciation, grammar, and fluency. This feedback helps learners identify areas that need improvement. The more feedback learners receive, the more they can adjust and refine their skills. Constructive criticism in both music and language helps the learner grow and achieve greater mastery over time. Finally, both language learning and playing an instrument lead to the ability to connect with others. Music is often called a universal language, bringing people together across cultures and boundaries. Similarly, learning a new language allows people to communicate and connect with individuals from different backgrounds. In both cases, mastering these skills opens doors to new experiences, relationships, and understanding, making the effort of learning worthwhile. When I'm learning a new language like Spanish, I adopt the mindset that mistakes are a natural and essential part of the journey. Not worrying about making mistakes allows me to focus more on the learning process than on perfection. In my experience, worrying too much about errors often creates a barrier to progress. By freeing myself from this fear, I'm able to take more risks in my learning, which leads to faster improvement. I've found that approaching mistakes with curiosity instead of anxiety is crucial to developing fluency in any language. One of the most effective ways I handle mistakes is by seeing them as learning opportunities. Every time I make a mistake, I view it as a chance to identify what I need to improve. Whether it's a pronunciation slip, incorrect grammar, or using the wrong word, each error highlights an area where I can focus my efforts. This shift in perspective helps me approach mistakes with a growth mindset where each error is not a sign of failure, but a step toward mastering the language. I've also learned that it's important to embrace mistakes as part of the process rather than avoid them. Language learning, much like any other skill, requires a period of trial and error. Just like a musician makes wrong notes before perfecting a piece, language learners will stumble over words and phrases before gaining fluency. If I were to avoid speaking or practicing out of fear of making a mistake, I would miss out on valuable learning experiences. The more I allow myself to make mistakes, the more comfortable I become in the language. A big part of how I handle mistakes involves practicing in low-pressure environments. I seek out language partners, friends, or online communities where mistakes are normalized and expected. These supportive spaces make it easier for me to try new words and phrases without the fear of judgment. In these settings, everyone is aware that learning takes time, and mistakes are a natural part of it. Having a safe space to practice boosts my confidence and allows me to take chances with the language that I might not take in more formal settings. Another approach I take to making mistakes is using them as a way to strengthen my memory. Studies show that we often remember things better when we make a mistake and then correct it. This has proven true in my language learning. If I mispronounce a word or use the wrong verb tense, I take note of the error, correct myself, and move on. The next time I encounter the same word or structure, I'm more likely to remember the correct version because I've already learned from my past mistake. Feedback is essential when it comes to learning from mistakes. Whenever I practice speaking or writing in Spanish, I seek out feedback from native speakers or language teachers. Their corrections provide me with valuable insight into how to improve. Instead of viewing feedback as criticism, I see it as guidance. The more feedback I receive, the fewer mistakes I make over time. This process of continual refinement helps me build stronger language skills and reduces the frequency of my errors. While feedback is important, I also believe in not being too hard on myself when I make mistakes. Learning a new language is a long-term commitment, and expecting perfection early on is unrealistic. By being kind to myself and recognizing that mistakes are part of the learning curve, I stay motivated and avoid burnout. I remind myself that even native speakers make mistakes occasionally, so there's no reason to feel embarrassed or frustrated when I slip up. This self-compassion allows me to stay focused on the bigger picture of progress rather than getting bogged down by small errors. In addition to seeking feedback, I find that actively reviewing my mistakes helps solidify my learning. Whenever I realize I've made an error, I take a moment to analyze what went wrong. Did I misunderstand a grammar rule? Did I misremember a vocabulary word? By reflecting on the root of the mistake, I'm better equipped to avoid it in the future. This reflection process deepens my understanding of the language and ensures that I'm constantly learning from my errors. Mistakes also help me build resilience in my learning journey. It can be discouraging to make the same mistake multiple times, but over the years, I've learned to push through these setbacks. Instead of giving up, I remind myself that persistence is key to improvement. Each time I overcome a mistake, I become more confident in my ability to handle challenges in language learning. This resilience is not only useful for language acquisition, but also for other areas of life where setbacks are common and perseverance is required. One practical technique I use to handle mistakes is repetition. If I make a mistake while speaking or writing, I immediately try to repeat the correct version several times. This helps reinforce the correct usage and makes it more likely that I'll remember it in the future. By actively correcting myself and practicing the correct form, I turn the mistake into a learning exercise. Repetition has been one of the most effective tools in my language learning toolkit, as it allows me to internalize corrections more deeply. Additionally, I try to maintain a sense of humor when I make mistakes. It's easy to feel embarrassed or frustrated when you mess up, but I've found that laughing at my errors lightens the mood and makes the learning process more enjoyable. Language learning should be fun, and by not taking myself too seriously, I'm able to stay positive even when I stumble. Humor helps me bounce back from mistakes more quickly, and it reminds me that everyone makes errors, especially when learning something new. In the end, I approach making mistakes with a positive and open mindset. Like the teacher learning Spanish, I understand that mistakes are not obstacles, but opportunities for growth. By embracing them, reflecting on them, and using them to guide my learning, I become more skilled and confident in the language over time. Making mistakes is an essential part of the journey, and by approaching them with curiosity and determination, I know I'll continue to improve and reach my language learning goals. I wholeheartedly agree with the statement, mistakes are a necessary part of learning. In my experience, mistakes are essential stepping stones on the path to mastering any skill, whether it's a language, a musical instrument, or even a sport. Mistakes provide valuable feedback that helps us understand what we need to improve, and they offer an opportunity to grow. If we avoid mistakes or view them negatively, we miss out on the chance to refine our abilities. Embracing mistakes is key to progress because they push us to learn from our errors and try again. One reason mistakes are so important is that they highlight areas where we might be struggling. When learning a new skill, it's easy to assume that everything is going well until we make a mistake. The moment we slip up, it's clear that there is something we still need to work on. Mistakes help us identify these gaps in our knowledge or abilities, and once we're aware of them, we can focus on addressing them. Without making mistakes, it would be much harder to pinpoint the specific areas that need improvement. Mistakes also play a critical role in memory and retention. Research has shown that when we make a mistake and then correct it, we are more likely to remember the correct information in the future. In my own learning experiences, I've found that I often remember the correct way to do something precisely because I made an error the first time around. For example, when I mispronounced a word in a foreign language, correcting myself made the correct pronunciation stick in my mind much more effectively than if I had gotten it right the first time. In my own journey of learning new skills, I've found that mistakes are often the turning points that lead to breakthroughs. For example, when I was learning how to play the guitar, I constantly made mistakes in strumming patterns and finger placement. At first, it was frustrating because I felt like I wasn't making progress. However, each time I made a mistake, I was forced to slow down and really focus on what I was doing wrong. This process of identifying and correcting mistakes helped me improve much faster than if I had simply practiced without ever making errors. Mistakes also build resilience and persistence. When you make a mistake, it can be tempting to feel discouraged or give up. However, pushing through those moments and continuing to practice despite the errors helps develop a growth mindset. Over time, you become less afraid of making mistakes because you realize that they are just temporary setbacks. In my case, learning to code was a skill that required this kind of persistence. I encountered error after error when writing code, but each mistake taught me something new, and eventually, I became much more proficient. Another reason mistakes are crucial is that they help foster creativity and problem-solving skills. When things go wrong, we're forced to think critically about how to fix them. This process encourages us to come up with creative solutions and think outside the box. When learning something new, mistakes often reveal alternative methods or perspectives that we might not have considered before. In a way, mistakes can lead to new discoveries that we wouldn't have found if everything had gone smoothly from the beginning. In language learning especially, mistakes are an unavoidable part of the process. When I was learning to speak a foreign language, I made countless errors in grammar, pronunciation, and sentence structure. However, rather than viewing these mistakes as failures, I saw them as opportunities to improve. Each time I made a mistake, I learned something new about the language, and gradually I became more confident in my speaking abilities. Had I been afraid of making mistakes, I would have never progressed beyond the basics. One key lesson I've learned is that the fear of making mistakes can be a bigger obstacle than the mistakes themselves. If you're constantly worried about messing up, you might hold yourself back from trying new things or pushing your limits. This is especially true when learning something like public speaking or performing in front of others, where the fear of making a mistake can paralyze you. By embracing mistakes and recognizing them as a natural part of the learning process, you give yourself permission to take risks and grow. Another important aspect of mistakes is that they help us develop a growth mindset. When we view mistakes as part of the learning journey, we understand that our abilities are not fixed. Instead of seeing errors as a sign that we're not good enough, we see them as a sign that we're improving. A growth mindset encourages us to keep trying, even when things get difficult, because we know that with enough effort and practice, we will get better over time. In my experience, mistakes also make the learning process more engaging and dynamic. When everything goes perfectly, learning can feel stagnant or even boring. Mistakes shake things up and force us to adapt. They add a layer of complexity to the process, keeping us on our toes and ensuring that we stay actively engaged in what we're doing. In many ways, mistakes keep us humble and remind us that there is always more to learn. At the same time, mistakes teach us patience. Mastering any new skill takes time, and mistakes remind us that progress doesn't happen overnight. It's easy to get frustrated when we don't get things right the first time, but mistakes show us that learning is a gradual process. By accepting that mistakes will happen, we become more patient with ourselves and more willing to put in the time and effort needed to improve. In conclusion, I firmly believe that mistakes are a necessary part of learning. They provide us with valuable feedback, enhance our memory, build resilience, and encourage creativity. My own experiences with learning new skills have shown me that mistakes are not something to be feared but embraced. Whether it's learning a language, playing an instrument, or mastering a new subject, mistakes help us grow and improve.